Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. All of our WNST coverage around here brought to you by our friends at King Discount Liquors, lottery, beer, booze, and the best prices in Baltimore. Get on over and give the King a ring. I did that last week. I picked up some stouts. I picked up some lagers. I picked up some Malbecs. I even picked up a Pinot Noir that I made in my crock pot with some beef. So King Discount Liquors. It's not just for drinking on cold days. You can also cook with it over there as well. Don't forget our friends at Compass Point, that when the weather breaks, they're going to be golfing over there. But I know a lot of you put together outings in the spring, in the summer, in the fall. Think of my pal Robert Kennedy over there. He'll be talking some Terps with us later on in the week. And Compass Point, of course, 36 holes down in Pasadena. Learn more about them at compasspointgolf.com. Last shout out here. I want to give a shout out to our friends up in Bel Air at Box Hill Pizzeria with the crab cakes, the delicious dressing that I am craving. I'm almost out of the dressing, so it's time to get back up there. Going to meet with my pal Lee Tessier and some other folks up in Bel Air. So big shout out to everybody in Harford County trying to stay warm. This guy is north of the border right now. Somewhere near Shrewsbury, Pennsylvania. He is cozied up with his cat, trying to stay warm. And thoughts this week as we head off to Atlanta in Super Bowl 53, Luke, of Major League Baseball and a FanFest that I'm sure will be sparsely attended this week, despite the fact that Brooks Robinson and Eddie Murray are showing up. You know, it's not baseball season, and I know we're going to talk Harbaugh and Bisciotti, and you and I are going to be Super Bowling next week. But with the Hall of Fame this week and Messina on the hook and FanFest this week, I thought it might be a nice time to just breathe a little bit and see where your head is on baseball, because it's right around the corner. We're going to come back from Super Bowl and Valentine's Day, and boom, pitchers and catchers are going to be reporting. And we're going to be into this Flacco thing and into all the football stuff. But meanwhile, the baseball team sort of chugs on, and I'm still clicking on the website trying to buy a ticket, but I can't, Luke.
Yeah, and I mean, this is what rebuilding is. I mean, you know, the very beginning of it, and I wrote about this a little bit at WNST.net last week, the very beginning of it is a lot of waiting and a lot of stuff being done behind the scenes and infrastructure of scouting and analytics and player development, and still waiting to hear Brandon Hyde officially announce his coaching staff. You know, most of that has been kind of piecework together. I think, you know, it's about as good as you can do at this point in time, understanding that when he was hired right before Christmas, many of the coaches that might have joined his staff probably had jobs elsewhere. So I think that's going to change over the next calendar year. Probably see some changes there next year, but his first staff has yet to be announced. And no surprise, but the Orioles have not been active on the free agent market, along with about 26 other teams.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's the real story here. Isn't the Orioles or FanFest or whatever? Maybe the real reason we should be sitting here talking is Machado, Harper. I mean, like, the collusive part of this, and I know I talked to Alan about this last week because we talked like real baseball, not Messina, like you and I did about the Hall of Fame, but that the fact that the analytics departments have gotten involved here and said, whoa, 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 whoa. We remember what, you know, Tom Hicks did with A-Rod 20 years ago. We have data now that supports that giving Johnny Hustle $300 million, that ain't the number on him. The number on him is $1.75, and his agent can pound sand if he doesn't like it. And, you know, I don't know where all of this is, but I did live through the dark ages, and I read Lords of the Realm 30 years ago. Boy, when baseball is just swimming in money, you know, the Angelos boys have just fallen into this tub of butter that they can run a team that's going to lose 110 games this year and still somehow pocket $50 million in profit if they don't give it all away to the likes of Chris Davis. We're in a different era here, and crying poor used to be the way owners worked. Now they cry you're not worth it. And the nerds all stand up and say, yeah. Meanwhile, the owners are pocketing a whole lot of money right now, and they're not giving it up, man.
Yeah, and that's where I think you point to the next labor agreement and what is a absolutely overwhelming sense of there's going to be a work stoppage because, you know, to your point,
that's just what baseball needs right now, right? I mean, they needed a work stoppage.
I mean, no sport wants a work stoppage, and there's lots of sentiment that there's going to be a work stoppage the next time there's a CBA in the NFL.
But every time there's been a work stoppage, it's felt like the sport is headed towards some level of prosperity during my lifetime. It's always felt like they're fighting over this next bale of money and the next fans and the next stadium and the next everything. Boy, with baseball, I feel like we're closer to the ledge than we are anywhere else. I know football has its concussion issues and its physical issues and all of that stuff. But with baseball, there's an interest level issue, a generational issue, a racial issue. It's a city issue. Just in our town. Our town is the beginning of all of baseball's problems. And, it's going to take smart people. And I don't know that Lou and John really strike me as the smartest lads right now as to how to market their way out of this and get people beyond you and me to care about baseball again here. And that's the real concern for me, is that this feels nasty, it feels ugly and all that, but it always felt like, well, baseball will be fine in the aftermath. It'll just come roaring back. I don't know. I wouldn't bet $1 on that right now, Luke, and I'm 50.
Well, betting $1, maybe some real money. I could hear what you're saying there, but
I wouldn't want to be the guy giving the Angelos boys $1.2 billion right now and trying to figure out how to make this work again and how to make people give their money and fall back in love with the brand here. And there's a lot of places where they've never fallen in love with the brand. And then there's places like Kansas City and Houston and Pittsburgh and other places where they fall in love for 5 minutes and go away. Then there are the Cubs and the Yankees and the Red Sox and the Dodgers that are kind of real. They're the real franchise. I mean, what we're seeing here really in baseball is the premiership and everything else, and the money is separated now dramatically as well on the local level, and we're seeing the analytics start to support that. Well, maybe you should just put a bunch of money in your pocket. Maybe one day you'll win, and if you do, you get to be the Astros, and if you don't, you still get to make a lot of money.
Yeah, well, and that's where I think we have seen a shift from teams just crying poor to teams, frankly, being smarter. A lot of bad contracts were given out for a long time, and look, I'm not pro-owner and anti-player or pro-player and anti-owner. I mean, I'm trying to look at this as objectively as I can.
You're Bowie Kuhn, right? You're the best interest of the game, right?
Right,
You're Bart Giamatti is what you are.
And look, the Orioles are a perfect example right now. I mean, the Orioles would be dumb to go out there and sign free agents with the thought of winning 71 games is better than winning 56 games. 'Cause I don't think fans care. I don't think at some point you get to a point where you're losing in the scope of an individual season, and I don't think it really matters whether you go 71 and 91 or maybe this year being a little extreme with this past year 115 losses. But let's just say the Orioles lose 104 games this year, which I think is probably a pretty good bet that they're going to have triple-digit losses. Is that really that much worse than losing 91 games? And what are you spending? What value are you getting out of that? So I think teams are getting smarter. I think that's absolutely true, and I think analytics play a big part into that. However, on the flip side, when you start it's one thing to say that you don't want to give a 35-year-old Nick Markakis a 3-year deal. It's one thing to say you don't want to give a 33-year-old Adam Jones a 3-year deal. It's another thing to say that you don't want to give a long-term deal to a Manny Machado or a Bryce Harper who are 26 years old, and by every measure of analytics, when you're talking about WAR and win probability added and adjusted OPS, I mean, go down the list of every advanced statistic that you want to throw out there would suggest that either one of those guys, from a value standpoint, are worth $30+ million a year. And, talking about a 7, 8, 9, maybe a 10-year deal. Look, I'm not feeling too good about giving anyone a 10-year deal, but I sure as hell would rather give it to a 26-year-old superstar like Manny Machado or Bryce Harper rather than the 10-year deals that had been given out in previous examples, Albert Pujols, and go down the list of not a big list of guys, but guys who've gotten 8, 9, 10-year commitments. So when you start seeing that, that's where you do start to lose people when you start to look at just the intellectual side of this compared to you're just not willing to make a great investment in a great ball player. And I think there's a trickle-down effect here. I think you have the teams like the Orioles, and the Orioles are one of many teams in that category who, let's face it, aren't trying to win in the context of the here and now in terms of signing free agents and having a big payroll. But then, in turn, when you have enough teams that fit that category, what happens to the overall demand for free agents, Nestor? It goes down. So then even teams like the Dodgers or teams like Cleveland or go down the list of any team that is a legitimate contender, there's not as much urgency for them because there's not as much demand. And they say, well, if there are, I don't know, anywhere between, say, 12 to 18 teams that aren't really trying that hard, well, then that means there's maybe only 10, 11, 12 teams that are really trying to sign free agents. So, and not all those teams need a third baseman or a center fielder. So the demand goes down, and then those teams that have cash to spend, are willing to spend, want to win, they're not spending as much money because they're trying to get a bargain, because they're trying to be smart. So that's where we have this holding pattern where free agency is becoming later and later, and as we are approaching the end of January, you have, I'm looking at ESPN's top 50 free agents list right now, and 20 of them are still available. And, not that you would expect the entire list to be exhausted at this point, but you would expect more than 60% to be signed. So that is surprising, and it's a second year in a row that this has become much more noticeable, and this is where you point to the next CBA and wondering, one, are we heading towards a work stoppage, and two, what fundamental changes need to be made? Because I'm fine with saying that you don't want to pay a 31, 32, 33-year-old free agent a 6-year deal and overpay and pay that player for what they've been in their career rather than what they're going to be over the next 4, 5, 6 years. But that said, that means we need to revamp the system, and maybe instead of having 6 years of club control, maybe it becomes 3 or 4 years of club control. But even with that part of the discussion acknowledged, that still doesn't make sense why 26-year-old Manny Machado and 26-year-old Bryce Harper are, A, still out there, and B, in the case of Machado, the highest reported deal is a little bit more than what Chris Davis got 3 years ago on the open market, which is crazy to think about that. And regardless of what has happened with Chris Davis since then, just the sheer thought that, the mere thought that Manny Machado is being viewed in a similar light from a length of time and money standpoint, that's absurd. And that's where you do look at this and you really start to wonder, is everything on the up and up, beyond the fact that, as I do acknowledge, teams have gotten smarter over the years.
I've been around baseball the last 25 years. I mean, they put Gaylord Perry in the Hall of Fame. I've seen the steroids. I've seen the cheaters. I've seen the liars. I've seen Jason Grimsley crawling through, they're not on the up and up, dude. You know what I mean? I've dealt with Peter Angelos for 25 years. Ain't a damn thing with him that's on the up and up, ever. So, to think that all these guys are going to get together and this is where the Players Association, this is where the backlash now over 2 off seasons, where if subpoenas come and emails and collusion and things that didn't exist 4 decades ago with Russian espionage and whatnot, the espionage between the Cardinals and the Astros a couple of years ago, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. It feels to me like the owners just got in a room and said, the Adam Joneses of the world just aren't going to get money from us anymore, and this is all going to stop. And look, Andy McPhail was 35 years ago that began, but the fact that nobody's getting any money right now, that there's no give or take in all of this, I don't even know where it's leading. I mean, at some point, somebody's really going to sign a contract, right? Like, at some point, these guys really are, there is going to be a market, some point during Super Bowl week next week. I mean, how far is this going to go toward Valentine's Day if you're investing $200 million in a ball player that you're not going to have them?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be paid. They're going to get theirs at some point in time. I mean, Patrick Corbin got a 6-year, $140 million contract. You go down the list. I mean, Eovaldi got a $67.5 million over 4 years. So it's not as though that the market is completely devoid of good contracts. We're just the timeline and the overall amount of money, it doesn't seem to be where it should be. So,
based on how much money the sport is generating,
right, exactly.
And this is where the owners have just decided the only way we all make more money is for all of us to make more money. And as long as there's not some George Steinbrenner or Peter Angelos, as there was, or, in the case of football, a Dan Snyder or Jerry, somebody that's just going to be a man. The Tigers, right, with Ilitch for years. He was always the guy saying, I want to win. I'm making plenty of money. Let's go spend that money on, if I don't spend it on pizza, I'll spend it on baseball players. Let's go do it. That's all over with now that this thing really is being run by Harvard business nerds, really, right?
But at the same time, when we talk about, Harvard, Ivy League type of individuals, they want to win, too.
But the Chris Davis deal will be the last deal that's ever given out on, I like the way you smile and you're such a nice kid.
And that's a good thing, because that was a dumb deal. Now, what needs to happen, and this is where the adjustment will need to come in the coming years, and this is where we're probably going to see a work stoppage, if you talk to anyone that really thinks about this stuff carefully and really kind of understands it, this is where we need to see a redistribution of the money. I'm fine with saying that, I don't want my, if I'm Joe Average fan, I'm fine with my favorite team not wanting to overpay for 34-year-old ball players and, paying Chris Davis for what he did 6 years ago.
Look, they're paying for the sins of 25 years ago of not having socialism in their sport. Not having a floor, not negotiating well, using drugs as a negotiating policy. This war has gone on for all of our lifetime, Luke, and at some point it's going to go nuclear. It went nuclear in 94, but it certainly gets nuclear when the money starts to grow and everybody smells the money and the players aren't getting it. That will... Maybe the new generation of millennials won't see it that way, but certainly the old line guys, the old Mark Belanger era and the Marvin Miller era and where all this thing came from, man, those guys dug in, and they dug in hard. And, in some cases it's cost them Hall of Fame votes or it's cost them, money down the line. Mike Flanagan was one of those guys that dug in on Andy McPhail 30, 35 years ago, and it cost him a lot of money. Rock Reigns, all those guys of that era, they tell the younger players what's up, but whether Manny Machado is willing to walk a picket line with a $175 million deal 2 years from now, 3 years from now, that remains to be seen, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of easier said than done just saying, well, you're expecting all these young ball players to take a stand when they haven't made money. Now, look, the minimum salary in baseball is more than you or I make in multiple years, but it's still a case of, you're asking individuals who are pre-arbitration or first, second year of arbitration where they're still not making very much money. But, overall, the end result that I want to see out of this is I'm fine with saying I don't want to overpay for 33, 34-year-old free agents. I want to see then the 23, 24-year-old superstars in this game that are truly worth the nine-figure contracts at that point in their career. I want to see them get that cut of the pie that has suddenly just dissipated, has suddenly just disappeared out of thin air, and we know where it's actually going. It's going in owners' pockets in that regard. So I want to see a redistribution of the wealth, but let's face it. And Tony Clark deserves a lot of criticism here. There had the players' union and the baseball union for the longest time. What did we always say about it? It was the strongest union in professional sports. It was the one. And we made
fun of the NFL that they put their heads and their bodies on the line and don't have guaranteed deals, right?
Right. But when you look at how the last couple CBAs have played out, the players have given up a lot. When you look at the luxury tax threshold, they have essentially agreed to a soft cap and how it's played out. It's been a very firm cap in some of these scenarios that have played out where, a team like the Dodgers, last year was talking over and over about not wanting to go over the threshold. We've seen the Yankees stay under the threshold. So, and meanwhile, the players' union's been more worried about players having 2 seats on the bus during spring training and building in more off days into the schedule. Which, look, I'm not saying that there isn't a place for stuff like that, but when you're giving ground financially the way that the players have, and the owners are going to take full advantage of it when that happens, you're not doing a good job as a union. So that's where I do look at this and say someone like Tony Clark has done a pretty lousy job. And at some point in time, you need to dig your heels in. And I think it's funny. I read something earlier this week or last week from Ken Rosenthal, kind of talking about the players' union needing to compromise in terms of rule changes to make the game better. If I'm the union right now, I'm not giving in on anything. I'm dragging my feet on everything when it comes to the owners in Major League Baseball. When I'm seeing what's happening from a free agent standpoint.
Yeah, all the money's on your side of the fence, and we can't get to it.
I'm not giving you a concession on a rule change or something like that just because you want it that way. You want those things? Let's go back.
You want a pitch clock? Let's go negotiate, right?
Yeah, let's make sure that we're getting our money. So,
dude, they negotiated putting illicit drugs in their body and not pissing in a cup for 25 years. So, they had it all going on at one point, and the owners have, as the money has gotten monumental, the owners have sort of pulled it back a little bit. And I don't know if these kids have that makeup to go fight with them when they're already making $1 million, $2 million, $3 million. I mean, they're already well taken care of from the minute the jersey slapped on at the big league level. We're not talking about them being paupers. Maybe they're not as hungry for it as Rick Dempsey was, let's say.
Yeah, but it's going to be fascinating because fundamentally, and we saw this in the NFL with the 2011 CBA that made rookie. We spent time earlier this week kind of talking about Sam Bradford and Matthew Stafford and those last quarterbacks that got upwards of close to $50 million in guarantees and like these nutty contracts that you gave to rookies who hadn't played a snap in the NFL. But we've seen across the board in sports, whenever the unions have fought, who have they typically fought for the most? Older players getting the bulk of the wealth, and we've seen the younger players, the mentality of needing to pay their dues, so to speak. And we saw that in the NFL. We see that with baseball system.
But all that being said, by the time Machado gets to free agency, how much has he made? $30 million, $40 million? He's already made all.
I mean, he's made a lot of money at this point. But compared to what value he has brought to his point in his career, and if we kind of use the rough sabermetric idea that one win above replacement, one in the WAR category is worth roughly $8 million or so. If that's the case, Manny Machado should have been making $40 or $48 million a year if we're going to talk about that in a vacuum.
He's made $34 million. So, he is not a pauper as he goes to get his $200 million, but that's where they really siphon the most money away from the owners is at the top end, not the bottom end, not in left-handed relief pitchers. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Andrew Miller notwithstanding, yes.
Right, but for the longest time, it's always been viewed as we want to take care of the oldest players. And to your point, typically the older players are the ones who are most willing to dig in for the long haul with the thought that they were going to pay it forward and they were going to pay their dues, but then young guys that were in the game at that point in time, they were going to be taken care of later in their career.
I can't get Manny Machado to run the first base. You're going to get him to walk a picket line and turn down a $30 million salary?
No, but the point I'm trying to make, though, is it's always been older player driven with the thought that the younger players would be taken care of. No,
I agree with you 1,000,000%. Yes,
we're seeing teams because they have evolved intellectually, and they're always going to try to take advantage of any edge they can get. We're seeing teams now saying, "Well, you know what? Things have changed because we're finding out more and more it's not smart to give older players these deals and to overpay." For what, it's not smart to pay Chris Davis $20+ million in 2019 because he had 53 home runs 6 years ago. And that's fine, but then you need to redistribute the wealth, and that's where, to me, we're looking at this, kind of head towards a cliff as far as a work stoppage and needing to fundamentally revamp the system in terms of players being under control for 6 years, in terms of caps for the amateur draft and even the international market, I think if you can revamp those things, it will go a long way to making this all on the up and up and kosher again. And then we're not going to be as concerned about a 33-year-old player past his prime not getting a great contract, because guess what? That player who was one of the best players in baseball a decade earlier, they're going to be compensated more justifiably, more fairly for what they are actually worth. And then we're not talking about a 26-year-old Manny Machado. We're talking about Manny Machado at age 22 getting $20 million at that point in time, not having to wait and then all of a sudden finding out that, we've moved the goalpost, so to speak, and that's what this really is feeling like from a fundamental standpoint, and that's where baseball needs to change its system, and that's where the Players Union is going to have to dig in here and take a stand, and guess what? It may not be pretty, and that's where I go back to, as far as the long-term health of the game, that's where I'm really concerned, because I don't want to see a work stoppage, but in order to get those things that I'm suggesting, where you would revamp club control and arbitration and spending for the draft and the international market, you're talking about some cheap labor there for the owners, and that's going to cut into their profit margins. And I think you're going to see, you're going to see a heck of a fight if it comes down to that. And I don't see it being something that that's going to be solved in a timely manner. So you could be talking about losing a full season or more of action, and then we just talk about how damaging that is to the sport, understanding what happened 25 years ago.
Well, sports fans, FanFest is this week down at the Convention Center. Come on out. The Orioles are sure to lose 100 games this year. Luke Jones is here. He is Luke at WNST.net, and Baltimore Luke out on Twitter as well. This is the last thing on the Orioles here on FanFest and on them doing a party this week and how poorly they are run as an organ. I mean, you can say what you want about Elias and Brandon Hyde. And, I'll hear all that on the baseball side. Their tickets aren't on sale. They have done nothing in the offseason here with the community. Their owners have run their biggest offseason acquisition has been Billy Joel one night on my mother's 100th birthday. For the fans that are going to freeze and come down and stand in line to get autographs, whatever they're going to do this week, and meet the bird and tell Rockabacco what a great job he's doing as a team employee, and whatever else is going to happen this week, I'm wondering then what happens, for spring trade. Who's going to play on the team? I mean, that's the one thing we haven't talked about in 3 months is who are the players. It's not Adam Jones anymore, and anybody that woke up last year and maybe put the game on in August and September like my wife is like, who the hell are these guys? Kind of like the old Major League thing. There's going to be a lot of who the hell are these guys, and to some degree they still have some expensive pitching around here, right? I mean, are those guys going to come north with the team?
Well, at this point, I'd say there's probably a pretty good chance they come north with the team, but this is rebuilding. I mean, this offseason has gone exactly how I thought it would. I mean, this is, maybe if they get to late February and there is, and I don't know, I'm just going to throw out one random name, Mike Moustakas, let's say, and this is the second year in a row for him that he's kind of found this kind of market for his services or lack thereof. Short of signing a veteran player of that ilk to a one-year deal, and frankly with the intentions of flipping that player at the trade deadline, they're going to go north with basically what they have right now.
It's incredible, dude. Like, I'm on our website, right, on the Orioles roster on WNST.net, and like top to bottom, if I read the names, and we have a sports audience here, I don't know that most of the people in the audience know half of the names, if not a third of the names. I mean, Hanser Alberto, Austin Bryce, Cody Carroll. I'm just trying to get Paul Fry. They know who Hunter Harvey is. I know.
I pitched pretty well last year.
Yeah, I know. I'm just going through names here that people might not say. David Hess, Drew Jackson, Brandon Klein, Richie Martin, John Means. People know who Cedric Mullins is, but, Renato Nunez, Evan Phillips, Jeffrey. I love Jeffrey Ramirez. Josh Rogers, Rio Ruiz. He's a third baseman. Tanner Scott, not Scott Tanner, excuse me. Of course, Chance Sisco. We've always heard about him. Dylan Tate, Steve Wilkerson, Austin Wynns. These are the names mixed in with the Michael Givens types that we've seen for a year or two. But boy, there's not a Adam Jones or a Matt Wieters or a Nick. There's nothing in there that people out in our community own jerseys of this side of, I guess, Mancini, right? There's a couple of Mancini. Chris Davis is still on the team. But, I mean, just going through these names, it's who are these guys, literally?
Yeah, well, this is rebuilding. I mean, again, I'm not trying to be flippant with you. I mean, but this is rebuilding. You don't rebuild and then go sign a bunch of known players. I mean, again, the goal is not to win 73 games. I mean, the goal is you're doing what you can to try to, you're using all of your resources to lay a foundation, and obviously you're saving, you're not spending as much money in the process. I get that. But
now the question I have is, how do you market it? How do you make that exciting this week?
And this is what I wrote at WNST.net last week, where we're talking about, I mean, right now, and I want to give a shout-out to one of my Facebook friends, Richard, who he basically equated to the start of the Orioles rebuild. The next 2 years are kind of like watching the basement, the foundation of a house being built. It's boring. There's a lot of waiting. There's nothing exciting. You can't see the end. As much as you try to visualize what that house is going to look like, it's not there yet. It's not even close to being there.
Yeah, their pile diver for their next championship is playing Little League somewhere.
I mean, you hope it's not Little League, but they're definitely,
Pony
you're talking
League.
about, you're hoping
JV.
that your next Manny Machado. I mean, you're talking about a guy that's a senior in high school right now. You're talking about a guy that's a freshman in college. Yeah. Now, that said, and I'll throw this out there, with Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal and the Astros, they had players like Dallas Keuchel and George Springer and Jose Altuve already in the system. Now, no one knew who those guys were at that point in time, but my point is, that's not to say the Orioles don't have some really talented players in their system right now, and I think they have some talent. I don't think the cupboard is completely bare. Does it need to be filled way more? Absolutely. And part of that is going to be having the first pick in every round come June this year, and probably having a really good chance to be the number one pick next year as well. So a lot of that's going to come, but in the case of what the Astros did, what guys like what Jeff Luhnow did, and Elias, who's obviously here now, and Sig Mejdal, who's here now, they had talent that was already there in Houston, and with their methodologies, with their methods and analytics and different numbers, they were able to kind of decipher, okay, first of all, you got to find the right talent, and guys have to have a certain, there's a requisite level of talent that you have to have. You're not taking a terrible ball player and turning them into a good one, but are you identifying talented players, and then what do you do with them? And it goes back to which players on the Orioles right now have a growth mindset to take new data and new methodologies and new process to improve. Can they harness Dylan Bundy's talent better than the Orioles did over the last few years? I tend to think that they can. And what does that mean? Well, that means probably Dylan Bundy will be traded then for more prospects because he's going to be a free agent in a couple years. So, you have a lot of that, but there's a lot of building. They're not spending a lot on the major league payroll right now. And again, if you want some names, fine. I don't think people are coming out to watch names. I think that whole argument, that's where teams have gotten smarter in realizing that
if we lose, it doesn't matter who's playing.
Exactly. Short of Ken Griffey Jr., Cal Ripken types, you're talking about generational types. Short of a very short list. Right now, who would it be that list in baseball of guys that people go out of their way to pay to see? Mike Trout, maybe? Go down the list.
Manny Machado, Bryce Harper.
You had Manny Machado. Think about it. Here in Baltimore, we had Manny Machado the last 6 years, and the Orioles were good for a large portion of that time. And they still, even at their best, the attendance was just okay or just solid. A couple years back, they were in wild card contention and made the wild card in 2016, and we were talking about attendance in September. So, The point being, you shouldn't make those moves to try to drive attendance. But, and I'll go back to a point you made a few minutes ago because I 1,000% agree, if you're not going to be able to market the baseball team, and let's face it, there is nothing to market with this Major League roster right now. And I say that with no disrespect intended to Trey Mancini or Dylan Bundy or Cedric Mullins or any number of guys that are going to be on the Major League roster at some point here in 2019. There's nothing to market. They're going to be terrible. And the only drama is going to be whether they can somehow figure out a way to avoid 100 losses or 105 or 110 losses. That's the extent of the drama from a win-loss standpoint in 2019. And that's not to say that Brandon Hyde's not going to have those guys playing their butts off every night. When we talk about a team not trying to win, they're going to go out there and give their best effort with what they have, but the talent is clearly going to be lacking. So what does that mean in the interim until they get to the point where they're not building the foundation, but they're putting the roof on the house and they're putting the cabinets in and installing and moving the furniture in, and they're ready to live, so to speak? You better market the hell out of every idea you can think of, from bobbleheads to ticket deals to partnerships for people to go see the minor league teams because you're going to market the baby birds as much as you can. You need to be doing all of those things as much as you can. And to your point, tickets still haven't been on sale. I talked about this after the Brandon Hyde press conference, which was a week and a half before Christmas, a week before
people
Christmas.
ask me why I'm going to wear my Free the Birds hat or how long I'm going to wear it till I get my press credential back, because if they're fixing things, they probably should start with the people that they've basically uninvited. People like me and everyone in my world that they don't care if you come or they don't come. Well, if you want us to come, it's on our terms, not yours. That's not the way it works when your ballpark's empty and you're going to lose 110 games. So they don't need me. They don't need people to come. I don't know what to say. They don't even have tickets on sale. You're not invited either. No one's invited right now. They're the only team in Major League Baseball that have tickets on sale. They don't operate like anyone else. Marty Conway always says it's unorthodox. The old man's supposed to be away now and someone else is supposed to be running the place. Then run the place. Don't just show up at a press conference with no socks on and tell me you hired the whiz guy from Houston and you're going to go back to Palm Beach and hang out. Run the place. And it doesn't. I haven't met John Vitelin. This whiz guy that they allegedly hired 5 months ago. I haven't seen him yet.
Right. And that's where they have, right now, the most difficult job in this organization is marketing this club right now. It's just the truth. I have faith in Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal, and, from everything I can see, I think Brandon Hyde's a perfectly fine hire as manager. I have faith and some confidence in that group because as much as we talk about, we were talking about baseball and teams tanking, they have individuals who didn't just tank. They were successful, and they made some mistakes along the way. It's not as though everything went perfectly in Houston. They let go of J.D. Martinez before he became one of the best hitters in baseball. They had the Brady Aiken fiasco. They had Mark Appel, who did not work out whatsoever. So it's not as though they didn't have hiccups, but I have a lot of faith in that group that they have brought in to figure this out and get this thing right and fix this thing and build a winner and build a contender, and you hope with some good fortune along the way, win a World Series at some point in, 5, 6, 7 years, however long it takes. But in the meantime, you still have to play games, and you still have to, you can't just close your doors. So that's where the marketing side becomes so critical in having as many promotions as you can think of. And maybe if you're struggling with figuring out who to do bobblehead days with, guess what? Do a Brooks Robinson bobblehead. I'd still love to have I don't have a Brooks Robinson bobblehead, I don't think, although I have a lot, so maybe I do. But you market your players of the past, and you use Brooks Robinson and Eddie Murray and Cal Ripken and Boog Powell and whoever else, anyone with any cachet, anyone that has any appeal whatsoever to this fan base, you use them and you have them involved and you make them visible and you market them. And you try to market the young players that you think are going to be the real deal. And maybe that's not the easiest thing to do now, but it will become more apparent as time goes on who are going to be the legitimate guys that you're going to build around and who are going to just be placeholders. But you have ticket deals and you have giveaways and you try to tie in things that you're doing right now with the minor league clubs with the thought that, hey, go out and see Ryan Mountcastle and Yusniel Diaz and D.L. Hall and Grayson Rodriguez and all these different guys that are going to be at various levels of the minor league system. And
is Bowie going to be the place where they're going to stack that? You know what I mean? Just from a pragmatic standpoint of having the best players there that are nearby that they can see. And it's always felt to me, and obviously modern baseball it's been different, but it would feel to me like that would be the place that you want to hang out if you want to figure out what's going on, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, at various points, I mean, a couple years back, I mean, I felt like Frederick had a ton. And, I mean, it varies. But that's part of the problem of their minor league system. To get this thing to where it needs to be, there should be players that you want to go
everywhere.
Watch at every single level. And that's where they're working on that. I mean, you know, this farm system has more talent than it did a few years ago. I absolutely believe that. And I'm talking even before the trades the fire sale trades that they made, which, you know, some were solid and others I didn't really like. And, you know, that's kind of the nature of the beast when you wait a year too long to start rebuilding, like the Orioles did with Dan Duquette and Buck Showalter. But, you know, they need to take care of those things. I'll continue to talk about this. They need to figure out in-market streaming. You know, they're going to have a tough enough time getting people to want to watch them, period, let alone not providing people the option of being able to stream games on their phone and stream games in general rather than relying on the antiquated cable model it's dying. I mean, just in general, it's not a baseball thing. That's just in general. People aren't subscribing to cable and satellite systems anymore. I mean, anyone under the age of 30, you are begging for them not to pay attention to you if you're going to continue to not offer streaming in your market. And I mean, they're
how about offering tickets to the games, you know, for Christmas? And, you know,
sure. Absolutely. I said this to you after the Hyde press conference. I thought that was a colossal missed opportunity. You know, why don't you market I said at the time, 12 days of Birdmas instead of 12 days of Christmas.
Oh, geez. So, you know, you and I could sit in the basement and come up with 1,000 of these
right,
that they
won't
use. In the old days, it's because the old man didn't like it. I want to know what the excuse is now.
Right. And who knows?
Probably Mama doesn't like it. Mama Angela, I would think, probably.
If it were me, first of all, I would have had that stuff out there already. But if not, and we're just focusing on the present and what you can do from this point forward, I would have a slew of ideas ready to go that I'm marketing at FanFest. I'm giving away a free ticket voucher to everyone who shows up at FanFest because they are, you know, those are your diehards. Those are your people that are there, one, because it is nice to think about, even if it's a bad baseball team, it's nice to think about baseball when you're waking up and it's single-digit temperatures to start the week. But from looking at this universally, these are your most hardcore fans that are still going to be going out there. So why not reward them a little bit on Saturday for FanFest? But that's where, to me, since you haven't done it already, and I think you should have, but if you haven't, you begin your marketing blitz where you're going to have every ticket deal under the sun available to try to get people to come to the ballpark, have a good experience. And, okay, the baseball itself is not going to be very good, but guess what? You know, people go to minor league games understanding that the quality of baseball isn't major league caliber. But guess what? The minor league teams in this country that do well, they market and they have a promotion for every single night, and they have silly uniforms, and they have promotions for kids in between innings and all kinds of stuff. And I know baseball purists cringe at that kind of stuff, but baseball purists should also care about the long-term viability of baseball, not just in general, but here in Baltimore. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done to improve that outlook and maintain a healthy long-term outlook for this team in Baltimore. It's great to talk about winning. And look, winning is paramount. There's no question about that. But they're not going to win much over the next few years. And that's by design, basically, at this point. You know, Mike Elias has said repeatedly, and he's right, there are There's no shortcut here. There's no fast-forward button here, short of drafting 3 Manny Machados in June, and those guys are ready to play within a year. But you need to really work your ass off to try to market this team in the meantime, and you try to come up with every idea you can that makes the thought of coming to the ballpark an appealing thing, and there are ways to do it. And look, they're not going to lead the league in attendance. I'm not talking about anything silly here, but if you work hard and you offer enough deals and you treat people well and you make it a good experience and you have reasonable concessions, which, they lowered they had some more reasonable concessions this past year. And we talked about the kids getting in free program. Certainly want to see that continue, but you've got to go above and beyond from a marketing standpoint, because you're not selling anyone on baseball. You're not selling anyone on coming to watch Trey Mancini this year or Cedric Mullins or Dylan Bundy, because it's not going to be good enough. It's not going to be close to being good enough. So you really need to work and be creative and hustle big time. And to this point in the off season, we haven't seen that from a marketing standpoint. And my hope, as someone who wants to see this team continue to be viable long term in this city, is they're going to roll some of that out on Saturday. And if they don't, then it's another missed opportunity, and then you'll continue to wonder. Even if the baseball side has a more encouraging outlook long term, you're still going to have your doubts about the rest of this organization, no question.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke. He will be fan-festing. I will be Oriole nesting and heading off to Atlanta, GA, just like Smokey and the Bandit. That's the way we're going to do it. Breaker. We might have a whole bunch of Smokey and the Bandit references next week for you before it's all over. Now that Eastbound and Down is playing every night on my television. The BuyItToyota.com Audio Vault will be there all week long for baseball, for Terps, for Super Bowl, for Tom Brady, for Ravens, for John Harbaugh, for anything we're going to discuss around here as we try to warm up and get to Super Bowl 53. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.